They told the world the case was closed. The shooter caught. A confession secured. Justice. Swift. Certain. Unquestionable. But what if everything we were told about that day was built on a lie? Because somewhere buried beneath press releases and police statements are fragments that don't align, timelines that don't match, evidence that doesn't behave the way it should. And a man, 22 years old, whose name was dragged through every headline in America, might not have pulled the trigger at all. September 10th, 2025, Utah Valley University, a campus turned crime scene. Conservative firebrand Charlie Kirk, dead. The alleged shooter, Tyler Robinson. But when leaked footage surfaced weeks later, it began to dismantle everything the public thought they knew. Frame by frame, piece by piece, a different story started to emerge. A story that hints at manipulation, misdirection, and perhaps something far more calculated than a lone gunman's rage. This isn't just a case of who fired the shot. It's a question of who needed the world to believe that Tyler Robinson did. You're watching Shanel Ben Report. Like, share, and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what you believe really happened. It began as a clear September afternoon in Orem, Utah. Students gathered on the lawn outside Utah Valley University's amphitheater, waving flags, snapping photos, waiting for one of America's most controversial conservative voices to take the stage. Charlie Kirk, founder of Turning Point USA, just 31 years old, was midway through his American comeback campus tour. By noon, nearly 3,000 people had filled the open field. Security appeared visible but relaxed. There were no metal detectors, no rooftop surveillance, and no bag checks. At 12:23 p.m., Kirk was speaking about political division when a single, deafening crack echoed across the crowd. Gasps, screams, confusion. Kirk stumbled backward, clutching his neck, then collapsed behind the podium. Panic rippled through the audience as students dropped to the ground. Witnesses described a sudden wave of chaos, people running, others frozen in disbelief. Police dispatches started flooding local channels almost immediately. We have got one individual down, possible gunshot wound, shooter unknown.
The Southampton reported one individual that was shot, unknown where the shooter went. And let's be advised, UVU in Orem has had an active shooter at the Charlie Kirk event. We're getting several calls.
A second report followed seconds later. Witnesses describe a figure dressed in black tactical gear, possibly on a rooftop near the Lowry Center. Emergency responders arrived within minutes. Kirk was still alive, but barely. He was rushed to Timpanogos Regional Hospital, where doctors pronounced him dead shortly after arrival, a single gunshot wound to the neck. Investigators identified the weapon as a bolt-action Mauser rifle, chambered in .30 WASC caliber, a powerful round designed for hunting large game. Whoever fired it had aimed with surgical precision. By the time the scene was secured, the campus was sealed off, and national media were already broadcasting live. Assassination at Utah Valley University, the headlines read, within the hour. And while chaos gave way to grief, investigators moved quickly, too quickly, some would later say, because before the first autopsy report was filed, before any footage had been reviewed, and before ballistic testing was complete, law enforcement had already begun circling one name, Tyler James Robinson. A 22-year-old electrical apprentice from St. George, Utah. And within 33 hours, police announced he had been arrested, the alleged sniper, the lone gunman, the radical who killed Charlie Kirk. But what would soon emerge is that nothing about that claim was simple, not his motive, not the evidence, and certainly not the truth. From the moment Tyler Robinson's name hit the headlines, the story unfolded with startling precision, almost as if it had already been written. According to authorities, Robinson had acted alone, a politically disillusioned 22-year-old who had grown increasingly angry over his family's conservative values and took that rage to the extreme. Investigators said he positioned himself on a nearby rooftop, assembled his grandfather's old hunting rifle, and waited for the perfect shot. When Kirk took the stage, Robinson allegedly raised the weapon, took aim, and fired once. A single bullet. Lethal, deliberate, final. Police claim that after the shooting, Robinson fled on foot through nearby woods, abandoning the rifle wrapped in a towel. Within hours, forensic teams discovered the weapon and connected it to Robinson through DNA found on the trigger and stock. A motive quickly followed. Reports surfaced of heated arguments between Robinson and his father over politics, screenshots of Discord messages discussing taking out fascists, and a series of engraved phrases found on spent shell casings, including one that read, "Hey fascist, catch." It was a story that made sense, at least on the surface. A young extremist radicalized by online echo chambers, a gun. A confession. A body. Case closed. The media echoed the same lines for days. Lone gunman identified. No indication of wider involvement. Investigation concluded. Within 48 hours, the FBI held a press conference. Agents stood beside Utah State Police, assuring the public that justice had been swift and thorough. "We have the man responsible," they said. "There is no ongoing threat." But as the days passed, cracks began to form in that certainty. Because when Robinson was taken into custody, he wasn't wearing tactical gear. He was wearing the same maroon t-shirt and light shorts he'd been seen in earlier that morning. The outfit matched surveillance footage of him arriving at the event hours before the shooting, not that of the black-clad figure seen on the rooftop. And though officials said he confessed through text messages, there was one crucial problem. Robinson never confessed to investigators, not once. The words that sealed his fate, the so-called digital confession, came from text and Discord messages that even the platform itself couldn't verify. So how did a young man with no criminal record, no history of violence, and no known motive become the face of a national tragedy overnight? To understand that, we have to look at who Tyler Robinson really was. Before his name was splashed across national headlines, Tyler Robinson was just another face in a quiet Utah neighborhood. A student. A part-time electrician sips his apprentice. A kid more interested in building custom gaming PCs than building a political ideology. Friends describe him as soft-spoken, awkward but sweet, the type who'd rather stay home on Friday nights playing Escape from Tarkov than go out drinking. He didn't own a car, walked to work most days, and kept a small rescue cat named Jupiter. He wasn't political, at least not outwardly. Co-workers recall him shrugging off heated debates in the workshop, saying things like, "I just fix wires, man." There were no police reports, no restraining orders, no social media rants. No signs, none, that Tyler Robinson could ever harm someone. And yet, within 2 days of the shooting, his face was everywhere. News outlets painted him as a radicalized leftist, a man driven by hatred of conservative voices. They highlighted one fact, a fact that would ignite a political firestorm. Tyler lived with Lance Twiggs, his longtime friend, and according to close sources, his romantic partner. Lance is transgender. When this detail surfaced, it became the spark that ignited a cultural explosion. Online forums and pundits immediately spun the story, "Trans activist assassinates Charlie Kirk." What had been a criminal investigation suddenly turned into a political weapon. Conservative media called it proof of radical gender ideology gone violent. Progressive outlets dismissed it as scapegoating, but lost in all of it was Tyler himself. His mother, Elaine Robinson, spoke tearfully outside their family home. Tyler's never even held a gun. How could he possibly do this? His childhood friend Marcus Reed told reporters, "This is the same guy who rescued stray cats behind the mall. You think that person assassinated someone? Come on." Even Lance, shaken and barely holding back tears, told police. "He left our apartment at 9 that morning. He was wearing shorts and a red shirt. The shooter on that roof, that wasn't him." And then came the part no one could explain, the footage. Because when investigators released a grainy image from campus surveillance, a figure in dark tactical clothing scaling the Lowry Center rooftop, those who knew Tyler immediately froze. The build didn't set match. The hair didn't set match. Even the walk didn't set look like him. So if the man on that rooftop wasn't Sep Tyler Robinson, then who was? By the third day after the shooting, the story had already begun to crack. Local reporters noticed inconsistencies in the timeline released by police. According to the official account, Tyler Robinson arrived on campus at 10:42 a.m., entered through the east parking lot, and made his way toward the Lowry Center, the same building where Charlie Kirk's event was scheduled. But the problem? No camera ever captured him entering the building. Not one. The only footage showing Tyler that morning came from a convenience store nearly half a mile away, time-stamped 10:47 a.m. In it, he's buying an energy drink and chatting with the cashier, calm, smiling, wearing shorts and a red t-shirt. The rooftop shooter, seen minutes later in the first wave of panic footage, was dressed in all black, tactical boots, long sleeves, gloves, a balaclava. The two images didn't align, not by a long shot. Then came the first leak. The local freelancer, claiming to have contacts within campus security, uploaded a short clip to X, formerly Twitter. The caption read, "UVU sniper angle not seen on TV." The 18-second video, filmed from a nearby parking garage, showed a figure moving on the roof, slow, deliberate, trained. At one point, the shooter adjusts what appears to be a small communication earpiece. The clip went viral within hours, and with it, the narrative began to unravel. If this person was communicating with someone else, who were they talking to? And why had investigators omitted that crucial detail from their timeline? Independent analysts began dissecting every frame, body shape, weapon stance, even the recoil pattern. One former Army marksman commented online, "That SIP's not an amateur, whoever that is. They SIP been trained. Notice the left-hand placement. That SIP's a professional grip." Meanwhile, the rifle found near the scene, a Remington M24, reportedly registered to Tyler's late grandfather, showed no fingerprints besides Tyler's partial smudge on the barrel, none on the trigger, none on the magazine. And yet that was enough for the arrest? Then, another contradiction surfaced. A source inside the coroner's office leaked that Charlie Kirk's fatal wound didn't match the rifle's ballistic profile. The entry wound was too shallow, suggesting a smaller caliber or greater distance than the rooftop position could allow. Still, the official press briefing the next morning said otherwise. Chief Reynolds stood before the cameras declaring, "We have our man. We have the weapon. Case closed." But to the growing number of online sleuths, it was anything but closed. The footage, the weapon, the autopsy, none of it lined up. Each new leak made the official story sound less like fact and more like a script written to end the conversation quickly. And that's when people began to wonder, who wanted this case closed so fast? When the Utah State Crime Lab released its preliminary forensic summary, it was supposed to bring clarity. Instead, it brought even more confusion. The Remington M24 rifle, the same one found propped against a ventilation unit on the roof, was immediately flagged as the murder weapon, but ballistic experts quickly noticed red flags. For starters, the rifling pattern from the bullet fragments recovered during Charlie Kirk's autopsy didn't perfectly match the barrel grooves of the Remington. It was close, but not identical. Investigators claimed the damage to the bullet was too severe for a conclusive match, but for ballistics specialists, that answer was far from satisfying. One retired ATF analyst later remarked in an interview, "You don't just call it a match because it SIPs similar. If it SIPs inconclusive, it SIPs inconclusive, period." Declaring it the weapon without confirmation that SIPs not forensics, that SIPs convenience. And convenience seemed to be a recurring theme. Fingerprints, partial and incomplete. DNA, present yes, but only on the outside of the rifle barrel, as if it had been handled briefly, not fired repeatedly. Gunshot residue on Tyler Robinson's SIP's hands, none. None on his clothes, none on his shoes. According to the official narrative, he supposedly carried the rifle up 3 flights of maintenance stairs, assembled it, fired 3 rounds, then fled, all without leaving a single trace of residue. That SIP's not how physics works. And anyone who's ever fired a rifle knows residue clings to everything. Then came the autopsy leak. When the county medical examiner's report surfaced, it contradicted nearly every early assumption. Charlie Kirk had been struck once, through the upper chest. The entry wound angle was shallow, suggesting the shot came from a lower trajectory than a rooftop position would produce. Even stranger, the residue pattern around the wound was faint, almost non-existent, implying the bullet had slowed considerably before impact. In other words, the shot may not have been fired from the roof at all. So where was it fired from? A private reconstruction commissioned by an independent journalist mapped the bullet's path based on available data. Their conclusion, the trajectory lined up not with the Lowry Center roof, but with an adjacent parking structure roughly 80 yards southeast, a structure that had not been sealed off or examined for 2 full days after the shooting. By the time investigators searched it, the area had been cleaned. No casings, no prints, no trace evidence. That delay alone was enough to make former FBI profiler Daniel Richmond publicly question the investigation. If your crime scene is compromised within 48 hours, you SIPs lost the integrity of your case, either that SIPs gross incompetence or deliberate obstruction. At this point, the physical evidence, the cornerstone of the prosecution, looked more like a house of cards than a solid case. And that steps when a darker question began circulating among those following the investigation. If the evidence didn't prove Tyler fired the shot, then was it ever meant to? Just when the investigation into Tyler Robinson seemed to reach a boiling point, a new name surfaced, one that sent the story spiraling in an even stranger direction. George Zinn, 71 years old, retired machinist, lived alone in a cluttered trailer just 10 miles from Utah Valley University. Zin Sipst's name appeared in police logs 2 weeks after the shooting, following an erratic 911 call he made himself. In that call, Zin reportedly told dispatchers, "I was there, I helped him set up. They said they're gonna blame the wrong one." Within hours, SWAT surrounded his property. Neighbors later described the scene as chaotic, flashing lights, loud commands, and an elderly man stumbling out in his bathrobe, muttering something about missions and orders. When investigators searched his home, they didn't find weapons or tactical gear. Instead, they discovered a collection of illegal material, disturbing, unrelated, and incriminating. Child abuse images dating back years. The public narrative shifted overnight. What could have been a breakthrough link became a moral scandal. Zin was arrested, not for the shooting, but for possession, and later, obstruction of justice. The official reason? He had interfered with the investigation by making false statements. And yet, something about his timing raised questions. Just 2 days before his arrest, an anonymous post on an obscure message board had appeared under the handle GZ Watcher. It read, "The shooter didn't act alone. I saw him on the roof, and I know who told him to do it." Hours later, that account was deleted. When online sleuths dug deeper, they found other old posts tied to the same username, cryptic messages referencing Operation Cleanup, UVU Mission Prep, and the fall of the mouthpiece. The phrase mouthpiece caught attention, many noting that Kirk himself had been called that by detractors online. Still, officials dismissed Zin as delusional, a lonely man seeking attention. Case closed? Again. But to those following the investigation, the timing felt too precise, too eerie to be coincidence. How did a man like Zin know specific details about the shooter's position before they were ever released to the public? And why, after his arrest, was every trace of his online activity quietly scrubbed within days? Zin's name vanished from the headlines almost as quickly as it appeared. But for those looking closely, his brief, chaotic entry into the case left behind an unsettling question. Was George Zin just a delusional old man? Or a deliberate distraction meant to keep eyes off the real shooter? By late September, a new theory had begun circulating through Reddit threads, Telegram groups, and independent podcasts, a theory that questioned everything about the case against Tyler Robinson. It was called the decoy theory. According to those who followed it, Tyler wasn't the shooter at all. He was the decoy. The theory hinged on one key idea: that Tyler's digital footprint, his messages, his online presence, even parts of his location data had been deliberately altered to frame him. The supposed smoking gun came from a set of Discord messages released by law enforcement. Authorities claimed they showed Tyler discussing the shooting days in advance with his roommate and partner Lance Twiggs. But when cyber forensics experts examined the screenshots, cracks appeared almost instantly. The timestamps were inconsistent, some aligned with Utah's Mountain Time Zone, others with Eastern Standard Time, hours apart. Metadata embedded in the exported files didn't match Discord's standard encryption signature. And most suspicious of all, the phrasing in the alleged messages didn't sound human. Digital linguists analyzed the syntax and noticed something chilling. The conversation bore signs of AI-assisted text generation. Perfect punctuation. Robotic phrasing. Unnatural rhythm. As one analyst put it, it reads like a screenplay about a shooting, not a real exchange between two people. When confronted, Discord SIP's public relations team issued a short statement. After an internal audit, we found no evidence of planning or extremist content associated with the named users. That denial didn't make headlines, but it did fuel the growing suspicion that the digital evidence had been planted. Hackers and open source investigators began cross-referencing IP logs, old social media posts, and device IDs tied to Tyler's account. What they found was unsettling: login activity pinging from 3 different states within the same hour. Impossible. Unless someone had remote access. The narrative began to shift online. Videos, tweets, and long-form threads all echoed the same idea. Tyler Robinson didn't shoot Charlie Kirk, he was set up to take the fall. Each new discovery only deepened the mystery. If the messages were fake, the data tampered with, and the evidence inconsistent, then what was the real purpose of framing a quiet college student for the murder of one of America's most polarizing figures? If Tyler Robinson wasn't the shooter, then who needed him to look like one? To understand why Tyler Robinson might have been framed, you have to look beyond the crime scene, beyond the rooftop, beyond the rifle, beyond the fragments of evidence. You have to look at who stood to gain from Charlie Kirk's death. Because when the bullet struck on September 10th, 2025, it didn't just silence a man. It triggered a political earthquake. Within 24 hours, the White House released a statement condemning left-wing domestic terrorism. By the end of the week, President Trump signed an emergency order pushing the Department of Justice to fast-track the reclassification of Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization, citing the Utah shooting as proof of radical extremism. The timing raised eyebrows. No formal investigation had concluded, no motive had been proven, yet the government response was instantaneous, prepackaged, almost rehearsed. Behind the scenes, conservative super PACs used the tragedy to rally donors. Fundraising emails flooded inboxes nationwide with subject lines like "They killed Charlie, stand with freedom now." Meanwhile, dissenting voices, journalists, academics, and even a few members within Kirk's own circle began asking uncomfortable questions. Because just weeks before his death, Charlie Kirk had started to shift his tone. He'd begun publicly criticizing elements of U.S. foreign policy, especially America's unyielding support for Israel during escalating Middle East tensions. It was a rare break from his usual conservative orthodoxy. Sources close to Turning Point USA, the organization Kirk founded, claimed he'd clashed with several key donors. He reportedly turned down an invitation to meet with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and refused to soften his comments about global lobbying interests steering American policy. And then, just like that, he was gone. To many watching closely, it felt too coincidental. The swift political capitalization on his death, the lack of investigative transparency, the convenient narrative of a radicalized transgender-linked shooter, it all fit too well. Even Candace Owens, one of Kirk's longtime allies, publicly voiced her doubts during a podcast interview. "This feels orchestrated. You don't get that kind of coordination within hours unless people were ready for it." But the coordination didn't stop at politics. Reports surfaced that the FBI had classified large portions of their internal case file, including communication logs from the university's Security Command Center on the day of the shooting. Requests filed under the Freedom of Information Act were denied for national security reasons. What national security threat could possibly come from the death of a campus speaker, unless the truth wasn't what the public had been told? Every trail, political, institutional, and financial, seemed to lead back to one uncomfortable conclusion. Someone wanted this case wrapped up. Quickly, cleanly. And Tyler Robinson? He was the perfect vessel. Young, unknown, socially vulnerable, and impossible to fight back once branded a terrorist. If there was a motive behind the cover-up, it wasn't just about who fired the shot. It was about who benefited from the silence that followed. By now, the fragments of this story no longer fit neatly together. A rifle that doesn't match the bullet. Footage showing a man who doesn't look like the accused. Digital evidence stitched together like a screenplay. And a government narrative that moved faster than the facts. Every piece feels carefully placed, but slightly off. Like a puzzle forced to fit by someone desperate to finish the picture. When you line it all up, the question becomes impossible to ignore. Was Tyler Robinson ever meant to be the shooter? Or just the scapegoat? Because frame by frame, the truth begins to fracture. The rooftop figure's posture, trained, efficient, mechanical, nothing like Tyler's slouched, uncoordinated gait, seen in dozens of videos from his friends. The autopsy wound angled too low to have come from the roof. The Discord messages, digital ghosts, scrubbed of any verifiable origin. Even the speed of the investigation defied logic. Within 48 hours, the FBI had declared the case solved. But not a single official had addressed the leaks, the conflicting timelines, or the growing chorus of forensic experts saying something doesn't add up. It's as if the truth was less important than closure. Tyler Robinson was convenient. He checked every box for a ready-made villain, young, reclusive, politically ambiguous, easy to vilify once his private life became public. And when the system needed a name to plaster across headlines, his was already waiting. But if he wasn't set to the shooter, if the figure on that rooftop was someone else entirely, then every unanswered question points to one chilling possibility. The real killer walked away. And the story we were given was built to make sure no one went looking for them. The system found its villain, but maybe not its killer. It's been months since the rooftop shot that ended Charlie Kirk's life and tore open one of the most controversial investigations in recent American history. But even now, the air around the case feels heavy, unfinished. The public moved on. The network stopped covering it, and the official story sealed behind redacted documents and press statements remains the same. Tyler Robinson, lone gunman. Yet, for those who keep digging, the unanswered questions only grow louder. Where is the full autopsy? Why were portions of the forensic report withheld? And why was the university's surveillance system wiped, just days after federal agents took control of it? Small details. Quiet omissions. But in true crime, it's rarely the headline that hides the truth. It's what's left out. Lance Twiggs, now living out of state, hasn't spoken publicly since giving one final interview. Tyler was in sit perfect, but he was in sit a killer. Someone used him, and once they did, they erased him. That quote, haunting in its simplicity, echoes the central tragedy of this case, not just the death of a political figure, but the destruction of another life, one that may have been innocent. Tyler Robinson remains in federal custody, awaiting trial. His defense team continues to fight for access to evidence they claim was intentionally obscured. Meanwhile, the rooftop footage, the one that started it all, has never been released in full. And perhaps that sets the final clue. Because in every frame that's missing, every record that's sealed, and every question that goes unanswered, the silence itself begins to tell a story. A story about power, about control, about how truth can be rewritten when those writing it have the means to erase what doesn't fit. Maybe Tyler Robinson was guilty. Maybe he wasn't Sepp. But the case that bears his name is no longer about proof. It's about trust, and trust, once broken, rarely recovers. This is Shanel Report, uncovering the truth, one case at a time. If you found this investigation compelling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Your engagement keeps stories like this alive and ensures that the truth, no matter how deeply it's buried, is never forgotten.